You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
All right, welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health in cinema and television and how it is portrayed. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what should you know about mental health? I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a screenwriter as well as a professor of screenwriting, and I'm joined by my brother, a general and forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Josh Jones.
Good to see you, Jeff. Good to be here for all the listeners today. Lots of big feels about this one this week.
Yeah, this is something that's very zeitgeisty, and a lot of. Let's just give it now. Let's just say trigger warning for this episode. Very much so, trigger warning. A lot of spoilers, all that stuff. Okay, we want you to start your week off right with our podcast. We drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch us on YouTube or Patreon. Please know that all the proceeds from Patreon are donated to 988 call centers. Josh, tell us a little something about 988 call centers.
Jeff, 988 is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's the number that you or someone you know can call or text if you're feeling suicidal or in a mental health crisis. As always, folks, about this podcast, the information expressed in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing expressed in this podcast is medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is created. Jeff already said spoiler alert. I will also just say trigger warning. This is a trigger. Baby Reindeer is a triggering series, so pay attention to how you're feeling about how we're talking about it.
Yep. Yes, indeed. Okay, so thank you, Josh, for that. Today we're talking about, like you said, Baby Reindeer. Next week we're covering The Bear, so at some point we'll stop covering shows about cuddly animals. Wait, this is not a show about a cuddly animal. No, it is very much not. This is a show that is based on the one-man show of creator Richard Gadd, the show creator Richard Gadd, where he talks about his experiences with a stalker and being the victim of sexual abuse. What psychiatrically are we talking about today? Also, is psychiatrically a word?
Yes.
Wonderful. Nailed it. Crushed it.
Yes, good job on the making word mouth things that you're doing. Okay, so Jeff, we're going to talk about some pretty heavy concepts. We're going to talk about sexual trauma. We're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to talk about stalking and stalking behaviors. And then we're also going to touch on delusional disorder and a concept called erotomania today.
Yeah, erotomania was a word that I had not heard of before you mentioned it to me a couple days ago. So I'm really excited to dive into that. Anytime there's something that, knowing you for as long as I've known you, it's exciting when you tell me a new word, because I feel like at this point we've talked about them all.
We've used all the words.
We've used all the words,
including, Jeff, now psychiatrically.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I wanted to briefly mention this week's sponsor, and they're actually not a sponsor. We're not taking any of their money. They reached out and wanted to sponsor, but we said no because they are a good cause. So I just want to give a shout out to the NPAS. This is the North Pole Animal Shelter, who saves woodland creatures in the frozen tundra. For just $1 a day, you can adopt a bear cub, a gray wolf, or even a baby reindeer. You'll receive pictures of your adopted animal as well as paw or hoof prints. Help save the animals of the North by donating to the North Pole Animal Shelter today. There will be a link in the description below. Okay, so Josh, normally when we do TV shows, we talk about a specific episode. In this case, we're not. This is a limited series. There's only 7 episodes. So we're going to speak a little more broadly today about the mental health issues that are brought up, because there's quite a few of them, and they're all worth spending quite a bit of time on. So the one the show starts off with, that it makes you believe that this is going to be a show about, is stalking.
Right.
So the show starts with Donnie. Donnie's the main character, played by Richard Gadd, and he meets his stalker. She approaches him in a bar, asks for a tea. He very nicely gives her a tea, and she stalks him. At first, Donnie indulges her, cracking jokes, giving her compliments, but as she becomes more problematic and he tries to distance himself, Martha becomes more and more dangerous, showing up at his house, assaulting his girlfriend, stalking his parents, and ultimately shattering a glass over his head. She is convicted in the show and sent to jail after she sends some threatening voice messages. And that's sort of the story of his stalking, very, very briefly. So what's going on in a person who becomes a stalker?
Yeah,
psychiatrically.
So first, let's say that the portrayal of how this builds, how Martha's behavior builds from the beginning all the way through, I think is very, very well done when we consider what I think her diagnosis is. But let's talk about stalking first. So, stalking, like domestic violence, is a crime. It's not a psychiatric diagnosis.
Right.
It's a crime rooted in control. It's defined as repeated behaviors such as getting into close proximity, unwanted communication, or threatening gestures that instill fear. And it does affect 1 in 6 women and 1 in 19 men in the United States.
Oh, interesting. 1 in 6 women.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And that's according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, who also investigate things other than just disease. They also investigate any threats to public health, including domestic and interpersonal violence and stalking.
Wow. Okay, so let me ask you a quick question. Can you because I know we're going to talk about her having a psychiatric diagnosis. You don't have to have a psychiatric issue to be a stalker. Right. No,
stalking is a pattern of behavior that we described. Now, folks who have entered the criminal justice system and who are stalkers, who've been convicted of stalking or some other related crime, do tend to have psychiatric diagnoses about 50 to 75% of the time, and those can range from personality disorders to depression, substance abuse, and schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. But
those are just the people who got caught, right?
Those are the folks who got caught. Yeah.
So we can't say that 50% of stalkers have a psychiatric issue. It's just 50% of the people who got caught.
Yeah. I mean that's a good distinction,
because the numbers might be higher.
Yeah.
With people who didn't get caught.
Look,
they might be able to walk. They might be able to walk away from it. They might be able to make a more sensible decision. Whereas people with the psychiatric issue can't stop, or are less likely to stop. Correct? I'm sort of gleaning that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, probably. I mean, okay. I think that unfortunately, the character of Martha is not your prototypical stalker.
Right.
Your prototypical stalker, just statistically, is a man stalking a woman.
Right.
And they don't typically have a psychotic disorder like she does.
Right.
So she's not the poster child for a stalker. She's a very particular type of stalker, which I'll just transition into right now.
Right. Please
Martha's diagnosis, in my opinion, is that she has a delusional disorder, and a delusional disorder is a psychotic disorder that's related to schizophrenia, but not quite. So, as defined by our Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the DSM, delusional disorder involves one or more delusions, which is a fixed false belief. You can't talk people out of this.
Right.
That lasts at least a month, sometimes much longer. Individuals with that disorder generally appear normal and function superficially okay, as Martha kind of did.
Sure.
Except for behaviors related to her delusions. Unlike folks with schizophrenia, they don't exhibit prominent hallucinations or severe mood symptoms, although hold on. Related to the delusional theme can happen. Yeah.
All of this is great, and we're going to get through all of it. Let me back up and just make sure that it's clear. Talk to me about the fixed belief, because that's what's going on here, and I think it's really interesting.
That's what's going on here with
fixed false
Martha.
Belief.
All right, so a fixed false belief or a delusion is a belief that you can't talk somebody out of, and no matter what input or evidence the person gathers that might be contrary to that belief, they will figure out a way, or their brain, their disease really, will figure out a way to incorporate that to actually support the belief. So she's got a particular type of delusion called erotomanic delusion, and this is the delusion that someone is in love with you.
Right.
Individuals with this type of delusion believe that folks are secretly in love with them. It can lead them to try to communicate or meet with the person, resulting in stalking or assaultive behaviors, as it does eventually in this case. Any rejections are often misinterpreted as covert affirmations. So, like the person,
which is all over this show.
All over the show. I mean, this is a fantastic portrayal of delusional disorder and erotomanic delusions. It's written very well. Jessica Gunning, who plays Martha Scott, nails it, and it's so sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad because delusional disorder is really, really damaging for an individual. I mean, Martha looks kind of okay and functioning, but then, you go back to her house and it's in squalor and she's a lawyer. She became a lawyer, but she can't practice because she's so affected by these erotomanic delusions. And they come from nowhere. Right. The only thing that Donnie did was hand her tea. And that's a pretty good portrayal. It can come from absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's so much different than your typical portrayal in film and television, like Fatal Attraction, Misery, et cetera, et cetera. They really do, in a lot of ways, like paint her as an empathetic character. And, there is something to empathize with a person who just has a mental illness.
Who has delusional disorder.
Yeah, it's got to suck to just not be able to get out of that.
Let me tell you the good news about delusional disorder for folks, Jeff, is that it is treatable. Folks with delusional disorder can be treated with a combination of antipsychotic medication and psychotherapy, and can actually be pretty effective.
Okay,
now but
how do you know?
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
You've nailed it because folks don't have insight into the fact that this is a condition, and so avoidance of treatment or rejection of treatment is a real problem. We haven't really figured out how to treat that insight yet. So, creating a good therapeutic relationship, non-judgmental with your patient is really important. Yeah, delusional disorder is very, very destructive for patients, for their families. It's tough.
Yeah, and I guess if you're the family member of somebody who has a delusional disorder, just trying to get them into therapy for other reasons might not be the worst way to try and get somebody help. There's nothing wrong with going to therapy.
When I've had a successful treatment relationship with a person with delusional disorder or with schizophrenia with delusions, it has been when I've allied with them around their distress. I will say, hey, we can agree to disagree on this. I can't prove it to you, otherwise you're not going to believe me. So why don't we focus on treating how much distress the fact that no one believes you causes you?
Damn, you're a good psychiatrist. I thought this after dream scenario, you made a point about, what are you not telling me about the dream? I was like, boom, Josh Jones for the win. Anyway,
well, Jeff, a lot of experience in making a lot of mistakes and learning from them.
A lot of my friends are like, you're good. Your brother's great. And it's like, fuck you guys. Okay, so...
I want to go back to that point for a few minutes. Let's spend about
awesome
the next 30 minutes on that point right there.
Sure, we can certainly spend some time on your delusions. Okay, so the end of the first episode, he finds out that she's a dangerous stalker, and he accepts her friend request anyway. And this to me is what makes this a very complex show. But it's also the first instance of him not coming correct. This is a huge mistake for someone who is being stalked, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Let me just say up front to everybody out there, neither Jeff nor I are experts about stalking. Again, stalking is a crime. It's not a psychiatric condition. We're going to give you some information about it that we've researched, but no, we're not the experts in stalking. If you think you're being stalked, you need to get help with that. And I'm going to give you a number right now, right off the bat. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. They can point you in the right direction for local resources that can help you if you feel that you're being stalked. But Jeff, you're absolutely right. He leans into and encourages this this obsessive behavior.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
He should have stopped the contact, cease communication, and avoid contact. But what he did do, and is very, very confused, as we find out later about his past trauma. He was very confused during this time. Yeah. Didn't really know what to do. Wasn't reaching out to get help. Doing the things that we would advise not to do. Not that they're wrong,
right?
But doing the things that we'd advise not to do. And more than anything, I think he wasn't trusting his instincts.
So you mentioned earlier the fixed false belief. And there's a moment in episode 3 where I think he cues into that. He has taken her home after she's been sitting outside of his place for 15 hours. And he takes her home, and then he looks at her and he's like, "You really believe that we're a couple? Like, you really believe this?" And he breaks up with her because that's the only way that he can get through to her, is to accept what she believes as the truth. And I thought that was really interesting and really well done, where he had to just meet her on her level. And she did believe in that moment that they were breaking up. Not that he didn't love her. She still had that fixed false belief. Because that carries into other episodes, but she gets really angry, at him for breaking up with her. But she continues to think underlying that he's in love. But I thought that was a really interesting moment that just that emphasizes what you said about the fixed false belief.
Yeah, and it's also right in line with what I've seen family members of folks with delusional disorder try to do, is they try to reason with the person. You cannot reason with them about their fixed false belief, and then they try to reason with them within what they think the delusional person's boundaries of their delusion is, and that is also not effective, because it's not as though that there's an alternate universe or an alternate reality in this person's head that still abides by some new set of rules. It's the delusion, for reasons that we don't know, is so crystallized, so concrete, that every piece of information is going to go towards supporting that, no matter how much we or non-psychotic people would think, oh, that clearly negates your belief.
Yeah, what was the movie where the recent Adam McKay movie where the asteroid is coming?
Don't Look
Up. Man, we should do Don't Look Up at some point, because all the things we're talking about with fixed false belief, just really go to the many, many ways that we just put our heads in the sand.
Sure.
And people just not believing things that are obviously true and have been proven true over and over again. And this notion that, like, anytime you're disagreeing with somebody and offering them truth, it only helps to solidify them in their false belief. And this is happening so frequently, especially in politics. I think that would be a really interesting movie to do and to talk about that at kind of greater length. We got to put that on the list.
Well, the world's greatest shared delusion is money. We all agree.
What do you mean?
We all agree that these pieces of paper are worth something. We've all agreed on that, and they're really not.
See, I actually think that the greatest delusion that we all have is that we're going to live forever, because nobody really lives like they're going to die. but that's a conversation for a different day. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about his relationship with Terry for a minute. So Terry is a transgender woman, a woman who has transitioned, and we're not going to talk at all about transgender in this episode. I would love to talk about that at some point, but I want to have someone on who is transgender to talk about, their experience. But what's interesting in this episode from his perspective is that he starts dating a transgender woman because he's doubting his sexuality. Talk to me a little bit about that and what you thought about that choice. And that's a real life choice, by the way. That is actually something that he did in real life, and he talks about that in interviews.
Well, Jeff, of course, I can't give any opinion about the real life characters or real life people because I haven't examined them. Yep. So about the character here, I thought that this was a really interesting dynamic that played out. I thought Terry's character was phenomenal and phenomenally acted by Nava Mao. Who's done a lot of great work, and he was really, Donnie was really exploring.
Is she transgender? She's transgender, correct?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. And do you know,
according to her Wikipedia page,
and those are her pronouns, she, her.
Yes. Okay. Again, according to her Wikipedia.
Yep.
So, so that's fascinating. So his exploration of his sexuality. After his rape by the Darien character, is well portrayed as well, I think. So let's talk a little bit more about Donnie and his diagnosis. He's got post-traumatic stress disorder.
He's so interesting to me.
Why is that interesting?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I'm excited to learn more about it. It's just you think about post-traumatic stress being like a car accident, gun violence, being in a war. I don't think about post-traumatic stress as being, the victim of sexual abuse. They just feel like different things. But if you think about it, it makes sense. But yeah, I'm excited to learn more about it because I didn't think that's what it is going into this.
Most of the patients that I see who have PTSD, it is from some sort of sexual violence, either as a child or prolonged, or later in life. So it's very common, unfortunately. One of the tragedy of our species, and but he has post-traumatic stress disorder. It's defined by the significant physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral impacts of psychological trauma. So the whole body, the whole person, the brain, the body, the mind, the feelings are affected by psychological trauma. You're right. It can be wartime. It can be experiencing a near-death situation. It can be sexual violence. All sorts of symptoms that are in your arousal pathway. And we've talked a little bit about this before. Intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance of trauma reminders, and a real impairment in both your arousal mechanism and in your ability to experience normal emotions. And that's what they portray really, really, really well here.
Yeah.
Because he dives full on into a pattern of behavior that we sometimes see in victims of sexual trauma, is that they dive right into trying to numb out, and not like purposely trying to numb out, but that's the pattern of behavior they lapse into, trying to numb out, trying to figure out what this feeling was about or what happened. I actually don't think I can explain it better than the Donnie character's narration in that episode when he's talking about indiscriminately sleeping around with men, women, and everything that he can find. He does a really nice job of saying, I've already been abused, I've already been destroyed, so what worse is this going to do?
Like, who cares if it happened before? It's happened a ton of times now, so what does it matter?
Yeah,
and I've heard that from patients.
That's what's so tricky about this show, Josh, is stuff like that is so so worth hearing, and it's so helpful in talking about this stuff. And I believe he's being honest about it. But I also believe he's being honest about some of the really terrible things that he does. And one of those things is with the Terry character, where he lies. You know, he lies about who he is and falls in love. And that sounds really sweet, but if you think about that from Terry's perspective, that's terrifying. That is terrifying. If Terry was the main character in this, she's being essentially catfished. And that's awful. That is a really terrible thing to do to somebody. And I don't have a lot of empathy for him or sympathy, for eventually getting kicked to the curb. But I mean, I don't know. If I was Terry, I couldn't have forgiven that. Like, you lied about your name. Like, that's the biggest red flag in the world. I don't know. I wouldn't have gone back to him.
They do a nice job of explaining that Terry's got a pattern of trying to rescue men who are abusive to her. She even brings her 3 friends to the comedy show to try to keep her from doing that.
They're here to stop me from sliding into a familiar pattern of shame-based behavior with horrible men. Great line.
Right, which she ends up doing. And she catches herself, though, and she kicks him to the curb. And I was so glad she did. I thought the Terry character was written so well, was acted so well. You can quibble around the edges. I mean, I obviously don't know what the correct portrayal of a transgender person is. I do know what portrayals of just a person is, and that was just a great one. And
I agree.
And I was so glad she kicked his ass to the curb, and then didn't get redemption at the end. I mean,
he didn't get redemption.
Look, I would have liked his character to be in therapy the whole freaking time. That would have been helpful for him. Now, I can't go back and second guess and say, oh, well, you should have done this. I mean, you're dealing with the trauma the way you're dealing with the trauma. Yep. But if you're dealing with trauma like this, please, 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 please get help. Get treatment. Get therapy.
And look, this is something you said, but I'm just gonna steal it right now. Just because he was victimized does not free him of the responsibility of victimizing other people.
That's right.
And I do think that he's pretty terrible to Terry, and I'm glad that Terry makes the point about, like, having sex with someone under false pretense is against the law. He was gonna have sex with her until he learned that. And it was only after he learned, like, wait, I could go to jail for this, that he pulls back. He was completely willing to go forth until he learns that fact. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make him a good guy in that moment. And we do have to separate the two. Like, there are no excuses for bad behavior. Anyway, this is a tough show. This is just a tough show.
Yeah, this is one I think. It's in the zeitgeist right now. Of course, you always wonder how things like this are going to hold up. My suspicion is that this one's going to be talked about for a while. Even, as you and I have been pre-gaming this today, I've gone back and forth in my appreciation for the show and for the Donnie character. He's incredibly flawed. Flawed. Even though he was victimized not once but twice, he's still incredibly flawed. And he doesn't really get redemption at the end, which is, I think what we're all looking for. But, happy endings aren't real necessarily.
Yeah, especially not in these cases. I think that you just carry sexual abuse with you your entire life. And so the idea that, like, you can ever move past it is a false one. And so, him not getting the redemption, I do think speaks to how hard it is to move on from sexual abuse. Okay, let's actually get into the sexual abuse a little bit. And I do just want to offer, like, a last trigger warning before we start talking about this, because we are going to now talk about the grooming, which is heavily seen in episode 4. So in this story, Donnie suffers multiple sexual assaults at the hands of Darian, his mentor, and a showrunner who promises to make Donnie a star.
You're strange.
Am I? Shit.
Don't worry. I don't mind a bit of strange.
At first, Darian seems sincere, coming to Donnie's shows and giving him notes and actually improving the show. It's a real, he came and more people came to Donnie's show, and he actually was a mentor. So after promising Danny that they can write a show together, Darian begins his abuse, getting Donnie high and abusing him, ultimately leading to one rape that we saw, possibly multiple rapes. There's so much to talk about here, but Josh, just talk to me about what is grooming about. It seems like this is a more common thing that happens than rape.
Probably is. I can't quote you statistics on that. Not all grooming ends up being, quote, successful from the groomer's perspective,
right?
And not all rape stems from grooming. So,
right.
But the grooming behavior is intentional or semi-conscious behavior designed to make a person rely on or let down their guard or feel like they owe you, usually to get some kind of sexual or other interpersonal favor from them. And that's what happened here. What's really troubling, and by the way, I think this was a very good, very accurate portrayal of grooming. What's really, really troubling is that grooming's a skill. And you don't. I know. I hate to say that because it almost sounds like I'm trying.
No,
it's not a positive thing, but it's a skill,
right.
and you don't get good at your skills
unless you
the
practice.
First time, unless you practice.
Yeah.
So this was not
so
Darian's.
Dark.
This was not Darian's first time. He's an expert groomer at this, and he's done it many, 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 many times, and he's learned from his mistakes to be as direct and straightforward as he was with Donnie. And that's
I wish I would have
brutal.
gotten a sense, because they have the very brief interaction where there's other members of the writing staff. I wish I would have gotten a sense that one of them had been groomed. Just a look, just something. It would have been really interesting and added, a certain element to it. How did these guys get through? Because look, I mean, Hollywood is a really, really tough town, and there are a lot of people who have been on staffs who have been groomed. So the fact that Donnie wasn't actually allowed into that world doesn't mean he would be the only one that would have been groomed by this guy. This guy would have absolutely groomed people that were on his staff, that were a part of his daily life.
Sure.
So that would have been interesting to see.
Sure.
So grooming is just about power, correct?
It is about power, and it is far easier to groom. And I hesitate to say that it exclusively happens in disparate power dynamic relationships, but I think it probably does.
Right.
You know me, I hate to be an absolutist. But there's usually, if not always, a power differential involved, as there was here, and that was the thing that in Donnie's mind he kept going back to. Anytime his gut said I should stop,
right,
he made the calculation that I need to. If I'm going to be famous, this is what I need to do.
Yeah, and man, that's one of the things that just the most important thing to talk about is grooming and how prevalent it is, how common it is, and no one's immune from it. I am a 6'8", 250-pound man, and I absolutely at one point in my life was groomed, and the grooming stopped because something happened, and I'm not going to talk about what it was, but something happened that made me stand up and finally say, this was not okay. And it cost me greatly. It absolutely put a sort of a final stamp on something that I really, really wanted. But I couldn't really see it coming. I was a person who wanted something and had a mentor who believed in me. And I think that anybody who has a mentor who believes in them and they have a desire, they have a dream, anybody who that's accurate for, is a potential victim of grooming. And it sucks because that's almost everybody.
Well, I mean, it really is potential for everybody. And I think, as someone who's been now in leadership positions for a long time, it's something that we as leaders, we have to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you we gotta figure out ways to make the world safer. I'm obviously a white male. I'm a white male physician in leadership positions. When I go into a leadership position now, I embrace the idea that I need to prove that I am safe.
Yep. Agreed.
To folks.
Totally agree.
And walk the walk. And if you're truly walking the walk, it's not hard. It's not hard to prove it. Just
you just have to want to. You just have to want to
thing.
Yeah.
You have to acknowledge that, people who've come before me who look like me have done some pretty shitty things.
Yeah.
And we need to
look.
Walk
I was a talent agent for, at one point I think I had my agency represented like 400 people, and every one of my talent were people with a dream. And you have to just make it abundantly clear that you are an ally. You are there for them professionally. You have to draw some pretty tight boundaries with people. Certainly clients and anybody who has a dream wants a close relationship with you. You have to be willing to set those boundaries so that there's not even a possibility that things can get confused. But these are the things that you have to know and that aren't taught when you take on a position of leadership. There's no training for this sort of stuff when you enter into a management position or a position of leadership. And that is an absolute travesty, that sort of thing is not happening. Like, it's not enough to just get promoted and do the role. You have to get promoted and learn how to protect and how to lead and how to be a good leader. And a good leader means, making the people under you feel safe.
And another important thing that our society has to do is we have to make it easier and safer for people to report this stuff and this behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And here's something that, and this might be the cynical part of me, but HR is not always your friend. HR is there to protect the company. I wish that weren't true. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen at the collegiate level. Not where I'm currently teaching, by the way. My current college is fantastic, but in the undergrad that you and I shared, I watched women who came forward with a sexual trauma be swept under the rug by the university because it was bad publicity. I saw that happen. HR departments at businesses, they're there to serve the business. They're there to keep the business afloat. So they are not necessarily your friend. And there are probably some good HR departments, but you have to remember the person paying is the person who's in power. And so you're not paying the HR department. Somebody else is paying the HR department. So they're ultimately going to be the servant of where the money's coming from. So in order to have allies within a company, it's probably other coworkers who are more your allies, than it is necessarily HR. And I know that's a cynical thing to say, but I think it's worth saying.
Well, I think, Jeff, what it really points to is that everybody needs to educate ourselves on what are your options.
Yes.
What does going to HR mean? What does going to the police mean? What are the next steps? And we need to be more transparent about, what's going to happen. I actually thought that this show did a pretty nice job of portraying what I've heard from people is what the police can and can't do.
Yeah.
I thought they did a pretty nice job with that. The police want to protect people. Absolutely. Their hands are tied in a lot of ways. But if you're being stalked, go to the police. Go to the police.
Yeah,
collect your evidence. Go to the police.
There's so much more we could talk about with grooming. I do want to just sort of sum it up for people about if you feel like you're being groomed, get a buddy within the organization so that you can talk about some of these things, so that they can back you up. You might have to walk away. That's just the unfortunate truth. There's no point in putting yourself in a position where you're going to be abused. That's unfortunately what I had to do, and it killed a lifelong dream of mine. But if I had to do it again, I absolutely would have walked away. I would do again what I did. And here's a big one. Here's a really big one. I think people have to start reporting it even if it's not happening to you. If you see any sorts of signs that someone is being groomed, we need to start helping each other out.
Yeah.
And we know what problematic behavior looks like. And obviously we need to be trained about it, but we know more than we're reporting. And people need to group up and say, this is happening. We don't like this. If enough people stand together, you really can have more power than the people above you.
Wow, this is a really heavy episode, Jeff.
I know. It is a heavy episode, but I'm also glad we're covering it because I think you and I both started this podcast really wanting to be helpful to people, and it's very fun to sometimes have the conversations where we talk about exorcisms. But no, we want to. We both started this because we really did want to talk about like real stuff when it comes to mental health. Okay, so let's talk about just the effects of abuse. So we talked about this being PTSD. Here's a question, and I don't know how to ask this delicately, so I'm just going to ask it. How is someone who has PTSD from sexual violence, how are they able to be intimate?
Oh, really, really good question. And a lot of folks aren't. A lot of folks have very...
But he was. He was able to be intimate with these men and not with... He wasn't.
Really, really good. So let's dissect that word intimate. Was he intimate?
Yeah.
And and he actually points out, his character actually points out, that was the difference. That was the difference with Terry, is that when he started to fall in love, when he started to feel intimacy, that's when shit shut down for him.
Yeah. And that could also have been the difference with Martha, because it wasn't actual intimacy.
No.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
That's
really interesting.
Folks who are victims of sexual trauma, whether they meet criteria for PTSD or not, frequently have significant difficulties with intimacy, even with a partner who they know is safe.
Right.
Parts of their brain are just screaming, this is unsafe, even if they intellectually know that it is, and that's what they want to do.
Yeah. Wow, this is tough to talk about. Just anybody who sexually abuses someone just should die. Okay, so and I want to treat this with as much grace as possible, because I really do, obviously feel terrible for what happened to this character. Let's separate it. But the very beginning, they say this is a true story, and I just have a real issue with this. When something is a true story, you really do take it as fact. Based on a true story is a very different thing. Inspired by true events is a very different thing. And you will often see those, those disclaimers. So when somebody says based on a true story, I'm like, okay, the majority of this is probably going to be fictionalized.
Right.
We did Iron Claw, and it was based on a true story. And so you just knew that it was like, yeah, a lot of this is going to be fudged, and if I really want to know the facts, I can certainly look them up. But to say this is a true story is a big statement. And I think that it needs to be true. And I think that calling this a true story is what has led people of the internet to sleuth and dox the real Martha. And it's wrong. It is wrong.
Yeah, let's give our viewers and listeners a little bit of context. So we're recording this a day after a story broke that the person who may be the real Martha, probably is the real Martha, was being hounded by internet sleuths. And, you know, probably by the time this airs, the more will have come out about this.
Right.
And it just feels super, super icky.
It does, and because here's the thing, like, you know, she's denying a lot of it, which, you know, I'm not going to say what's true or whatnot, but I will say this: she didn't go to prison. Whoever the real life Martha was, did not go to prison, and that is what happens to Martha in this show. That is not true. That is not a true story. I read a lot of the interviews. One of the things they say is, you know, he admits it's pretty truthful. Not the same thing. Not the same thing as it's a true story. What's borrowed is an emotional truth, not a fact-by-fact profile. Emotional truth is not a true story. You could say this is an emotionally true story if you wanted to, but you can't say that this is a true story. Another thing that they say, we've gone to great lengths to disguise her. No, you didn't. The real-life Martha's tweets were still available. She committed similar offenses to the person in the show, and I'm not going to talk about what those offenses were because I don't want people to go and sleuth. But that was easy to change. She's a lawyer. The character was a lawyer. From the picture that I saw online, she looks very similar to the woman who played Martha. I don't know what they supposedly changed to hide this person's identity, but it took people a week. It took people a week to figure out who she was. Yeah. And I just think that that's wrong. He says the scene where he confronts Darian at the end is almost the most truthful scene in the entire show. Not the same thing as this is a true story. I just wish they hadn't used the this is a true story. It really, really bugs me. And this is the part that I think really, really bugs me. There is a piece of this that shows him as taking advantage of his stalker. He was getting something out of the stalker.
There's a reason you're keeping her around, and maybe it's what she gives you.
Got really manly hands, haven't you? Chiseled jawline. Should we run away together?
When the real-life Martha turned up, who thought I was hilarious, she might have been the only one on the planet that found me hilarious. So it was galvanizing. I loved that. I loved somebody laughing at all my jokes. Having someone at the end of the bar who was pure, unadulterated adoration is kind of what I needed, but it was foolish of me, and it was using someone.
Even after he knew that she was a stalker, he still was using her to feel better about himself. And if that's true, he's still taking advantage of her because he made this show about her. He was exploited by Darian. He was exploited. He was groomed, but in a manner of speaking, he was exploited. I just feel like they are exploiting this stalker, and it just feels wrong. Given the experience that you had, like, I just think that you would be more empathetic towards exploitation, and that's, I think, why this is sitting so wrong with me. Like, they're making a whole lot of money off of this mentally ill person, and it just rubs me wrong, man. I don't know. I think that's what it is for me. That's why this one's so tough.
The problem that I really had with the character, with the Donnie character, was in the last couple episodes. When he started to take and categorize and characterize all her voicemails, and then he was using them even after he knew how ill she was, how sick she was. And by the way, she shouldn't have gone to prison. She should have gone to a psychiatric hospital.
Right.
You know, we can get into it at another time, the concept of not guilty by reason of insanity. They do have that concept in England as well, and she should have gone and gotten treatment for her illness and not just gone to prison.
Yes, but they made that choice,
Let's get into
Josh.
that later.
They made the choice narratively for her to go to prison. That's not what happened. But I'm just saying that to me is awful from the filmmaking perspective. You could have chosen for her, because this is fictionalized, you could have chosen for her to get help. They chose her to be punished.
Yeah,
they chose her to be punished.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting choice, because as I've said this whole time, they actually, in my opinion, did a very fine job of accurately portraying mental conditions throughout a lot of this show. And then it goes off the rails at the end. And he continues to use her voicemails to justify, or not to justify, to make himself feel better about himself. And I just had such a massive problem with that, because it is exploitative. Not only is it exploitative, it's exploitative of her illness, and it's totally false. Everything she said was delusional. It had nothing to do with him. Yeah. And that was a point the character conflated throughout the episode as saying all these great things about him. No, she wasn't. She was delusional. She was really ill. You have no idea. There's not a single thing about you that she was really in love with. It was all illness.
Part of the delusion. Yeah.
And even at the very end, that scene that is supposed to be revelatory to us about, that's why she calls him Baby Reindeer, and isn't that heartwarming? First of all, who the hell knows if it's true in this world of her character, because she's that delusional, and even so, it doesn't justify his behavior, and it doesn't make him more empathetic. Yeah, I had a real problem with his exploitative use of her illness throughout the series, no matter how traumatized he was. And yes, the character was extremely traumatized, but I had a problem with him exploiting her illness to his own ends.
Yeah, exploiting her illness, and I will say it. I know that you're a little less hesitant, or a little more hesitant to say it than I am, but like exploiting her illness and then continuing to exploit this by making this show. This is the part where, like, I don't know how I feel about that. This does feel, it's one thing to confront your abuse. It's one thing to talk about your abuse. It's another to make money off of it. Because there's an additional motivation to not tell the exact truth, but tell the truth that's the most popular and is going to make you the best show. And that's where I really have an issue with, like, this is a true story. It's incredibly exploitative to make money off of these things.
So here's another
that's a tough one for me.
So here's another super odd point, which I think is probably so rich that we can't get into it now, and pulls at threads of power and gender politics and mental illness and all that sort of thing. Is, why is it the Martha character that's getting investigated and doxxed? Why haven't people hunted down and figured out who the Darian character is
100%.
and doxed that person?
And I read a little bit about, like, internet sleuths I think have tried, and there was a theater owner who people thought it was. So I think people are. I think that Martha was just easier to find. But I think that this is, and I think what our listeners are hearing right now is us processing, how we feel about the show. And I give them a lot of credit for that. But yeah, I don't know. The more I'm learning, the more I'm really seeing this as being very exploitative of something that really did happen to him. But I mean, we talked about this a little bit with Dream Scenario, where, like, you get a little bit of fame and then you want to keep that going. And so you're willing to just change things a little more and a little more and a little more. And it's so funny. He used a line in one of his interviews that this was emotionally truthful. And I remember you giving me a gang of shit about that exact same phrase when we talked about the Iron Claw. You asked me, do screenwriters have a responsibility to tell the truth? And I said, emotional truths. and I stand by that. I stand by that. Unless you say this is a true story. If you say this is a true story, you have a responsibility to tell the fucking truth. But yes, it is our job as screenwriters to talk about our experiences in an emotionally truthful way that is fictional. That is true. We want the emotions to be real so that people connect with them. But if you say it's a true story, it better goddamn well be true.
Jeff, shouldn't you write about what you know?
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for a wonderful segue. Okay, this is going to be the screenwriting lesson of the day, because I think that this is really interesting, and this comes from one of the most often given pieces of advice to young writers that is the most misunderstood. And the advice that you'll often hear is write what you know. And so in this case, you're seeing somebody who lived an incredible trauma and trying to be truthful about it and is writing what they know. We don't all have this level of an experience. You and I have never had a stalker. We've never been sexually abused in the way that he was abused. That doesn't mean that we don't have things that we can write about. Writing what you know does not mean telling your life tale. Write about what you know means write about the events of your life that changed your beliefs, because that's what stories are all about. So those are the things that you pay attention to. It's not, if you're a college kid, you don't write about your experience in college. You write about something that happened that has changed your beliefs. So that's what it really means to write what you know. And in this case, this is almost a bad example of that because he does write what happened to him. But I teach a sci-fi class. And a lot of kids will come to me and it's like, how do you write what you know if in the science fiction world? And my advice to them is, it has nothing to do with science fiction. If you know about grief, write a show about grief, put it in space. Science fiction. That's ultimately what we're doing as storytellers. If you want to write about daddy issues, put it in space. Prometheus. If you want to write about a breakup, rather than to be a woman, have it be your operating system. Her. There's all sorts of examples of writing about your beliefs and what has shaped your beliefs versus what you know in terms of your experiences. It's your experiences of belief, not your physical experiences. That's the screenwriting lesson of the day.
All the great Star Trek episodes are great stories about humanity.
Yes.
That just happen to be on a spaceship.
That's exactly right. And also, people should watch The Orville. It's literally Star Trek Next Generation 2.0 and more funny. Okay, so Josh, let's give some. These are just some last thoughts. I just want to sort of clean up with. This delighted me the whole way through. I love the detail of the iPhone. Every time that they clacked away the message from Martha, it ended with "sent from my iPhone," and he makes a statement at the very beginning that all these messages came from her iPhone, but he never saw her have an iPhone. And it's not till like the 4th episode where we see that we misspell iPhone, or it's send and it's two D's. Yeah. So the character is typing every time "sent from my iPhone" because she doesn't really have an iPhone. And I thought that was so interesting because she's putting on this persona of a person who would have an iPhone, and every time she's sending that. I just thought that was such a delicious little detail. And they don't rub it in your face. They just occasionally they misspell that last sentence. It was so well done. I loved that little detail. Yeah,
I agreed with you, and it happened to the few times that she did misspell that last line. It happened during times of extreme distress for her. Yeah. Really good point. You've made this point a couple times on this podcast that the screenwriters make you work for it, or they don't beat you over the head with it. And this is one of those examples, and I'm appreciating those more and more as we go.
Yeah, right. Oh, they're super fun. Yeah, even rewatching, there's a photo of Darian in episode 2, and you don't know who he is, but like they just linger on Donnie a couple seconds longer than they should, and it's like, oh shit, like there's the abuser in one of these pictures. You wouldn't even catch that unless you rewatched it. Okay, so let's bring it back. Let's reiterate a couple of main points. I do want to let's make this helpful for the viewers. If you believe that you are being stalked, what do you do?
You trust your instincts more than anything else. That little niggling feeling in your pit of your stomach or the back of your neck. Check that out. Check it out with somebody. Listen to it. Cease communication and avoid contact. Call the police. Keep a record of the contacts that the person who is stalking you is doing. Save evidence when possible. And in this day of digital contacting, you can save voicemails and things like that. And then get connected with the support system. All our local communities have one for victims of crimes or victims of stalking. If you can't find yours though, contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, and they can help connect you with resources in your area.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I was also thinking about this with do not engage in any capacity. If they're continuing to engage with you, you just have to let it be. Like set your boundary and stick to it. And I think that's, I know he got 41,000 emails or something along those lines. Don't respond. Like you have to you cannot argue with someone who is in that position. You have to just set your boundary, walk away, look for ways to make it end, but you're not going to be able to reason with that person. Okay. And then, let's talk about grooming in the same way. What do we do, if we feel like we're being groomed?
Get help. I think that's the number one thing. Get help, get support, talk it through. If it's within an organization, figure out, educate yourself about what options you have, what options you don't have, and then be realistic about the options. I think, I really don't want the message to be that sometimes you have to walk away from what you want because this other person is putting you at risk.
No, 100%.
And I don't want, and I think that's, it's not fair. It doesn't feel right, and I don't really want that to be the message. But if it's that versus your safety,
right,
it's got to be your safety first.
Yeah, I think about this with like people who are riding bikes. Don't take chances with cars. You have to be. You have to be responsible for your own safety, as soon as there's any of this behavior, you got to walk away. You got to,
Right. If there's a way, if there's an avenue that you can report it and you can get help and you can stop the grooming behavior, you need to do it. But what 100%. What I think people really have to fight against the urge is that I can manage it.
Right.
I can
manage 100%.
the grooming, and I can figure out how to get what I want while also putting off this person who's grooming me. And I think that's very dangerous, and people need to.
That's really well said.
People need to know that the groomer is better at grooming you than you are going to be at managing the behavior, because they've practiced. This isn't their first time.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awful. I just hate that we even have to talk about it, but I'm glad we are, because this is why we started this. Okay, that's I think that's it for me. Is there any last things you want to talk about? I'm assuming in terms of portrayal grade, this is a home run for you.
Yeah, for as much as I hated this, and as much as I really ended up disrespecting the Donnie character, for what he continued to do after after Martha was put away, he was an incredibly traumatized young man.
Yeah. And
the portrayal of that trauma and of all the ways that it makes your brain rebel against itself and makes you, contributes to your choices to do things that are self-destructive, was very well done. And you also don't see delusional disorder portrayed on screen very often, and their portrayal of delusional disorder and erotomania for Martha was, again, spot on. Painfully spot on.
Yeah, that's great. And look, I love any time film and TV can bring attention to something, and I think that they did bring attention to someone with Erotomania in a way that has not been done before. So I respect that part of it. I can also not respect other parts.
Right.
That's part of the human experience. I do want to make this one last point about grooming. The last point I want to make is if you are not experiencing grooming, that does not mean that you shouldn't be an ally. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have your eyes wide open about this sort of thing, because even though it's not affecting you, it is affecting other people, and those people need allies. They need help. This is everybody's problem, and we all need to help each other. All right, Josh, we got through it. I think we did. We did as best we could.
Challenging, yeah.
All right, people, thanks as always for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of Baby Reindeer. If you like this video, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Like is such a crazy word here. I don't want anyone to have liked this video, but I think you know what I mean. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. Leave us a comment on what movies you'd like to see. Shout out to our friend Spring Wise, who mentioned War of the Gargantuas. We will not be covering that movie, but the suggestion is welcome, and so we would like more suggestions. We're also on Patreon for Josh Jones. I am Jeff Jones, and we will see you next week for our coverage of The Bear.